Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. Another thank you to our platinum sponsor, EduPoint, who, without their support, none of this would happen, and all the sponsors and sys vendors who are here today. And how about the staff of the Jans facility? Let's give them a hand for the great service we get from them. Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker. Mr. Jerry Davis serves as Microsoft's Executive Security Advisor, partnering directly with Fortune 150 senior executives to guide and accelerate their AI transformation and cybersecurity journeys. His strategic counsel to these companies empowers organizations to innovate confidently while maintaining robust security and governance standards. With over 2 decades of technology risk management experience, Jerry is a 5-time CIO or CISO and the former global CISO for NASA, based at the Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley. That base is home to one of the original global internet nodes. His career spans senior executive roles at NASA, the U.S. Department of Education, where he was telling me he worked at the Department of Education when Facebook appeared on the scene. And imagine all the personal, private information that clashed with FERPA at the time. Pretty exciting time, he said. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, where I met him, and he took a chance on an introverted IT guy to help secure the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. He was the Chief Security Officer for Pacific Gas and Electric, the largest combined utility in the U.S. But early in his career, and what you're going to hear about some today, Jerry served as a counterintelligence officer with the CIA. I don't think he can talk much about that, but he's going to share some details with us today. He was a member of their international counter-espionage spy hunting team, responsible for identifying individuals engaged in espionage against the U.S. Jerry has also worked for Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency, CISA, serving as a Safety Review Board member and investigating incidents with national security implications. The most interesting thing that I read about Jerry was he's a combat decorated Marine, a track and field enthusiast, and a self-proclaimed adrenaline junkie. Jerry successfully completed, obviously, a high-altitude, low-opening parachute jump from an altitude of 28,000 feet. The regular one just didn't work? You had to go high? Okay. He holds a Master of Science degree in cybersecurity, Bachelor of Science in Business. He's originally from South Bend, Indiana, and he lives in Silicon Valley now. He's a former boss of mine. He got me entered into the U.S. government's senior executive service. He's a mentor, and maybe most importantly, he's my friend. Please welcome Jerry Davis.
Yeah, likewise. Oh, this is awesome. So what we're going to do, actually, we're going to talk a little. Everybody likes, who here likes a good spy story? All right, everybody likes a good spy story, right? And I know on some of the agenda, it talked a little bit about, kind of what I'm doing now, my time at Department of Education, some of the stuff I'm doing at Microsoft, AI, and all that. And I'm sorry to disappoint you. As we were getting closer and closer to the date for this, I decided, I'm going to pivot. I'm going to change my mind. People don't actually get to hear very much about my time as a CIA officer working counter-espionage. When I was in counterintelligence, I was also prior to CIA in the Marine Corps. I did a couple different jobs in the Marine Corps. I was in light armored infantry, and I went to the first Gulf War. And then when I came back from that, I thought to myself, you can get killed doing this kind of stuff, so let me change jobs. And I went into counterintelligence, which was even a little bit more perilous in the Marine Corps because they send you with special operations forces. So the risk factor of getting killed doing that went up even exponentially higher. But I started off in the Marine Corps where I learned to be a counterintelligence officer. I was a private investigator before that. A couple of folks that I've met here asked me if I've ever been to Nebraska before, and I have. Back in 2013, when Chris was at the at Lincoln at the university, I came and I did some speaking. But when I was a private investigator, I worked for a company out of Naperville, Illinois. I was living in Southern California, and they gave us a company vehicle that I had to drive back from Illinois to Los Angeles. And I drove through Nebraska of 80 and made it from Naperville, Illinois to Los Angeles, California in 34 hours. I just drove straight through all night. I did sleep a little bit in Grand Junction, Colorado, but I said those are the only couple times I've been to Nebraska. Drove through it and spent a few days here with Chris and did a talk back in 2013. But so today's conversation, what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about a very famous spy case that's out there that I worked on for a number of years when I was a young, 26, 27-year-old at CIA out of Langley, Virginia. And it's a case that's very well known. There's been some movies about it, there's a podcast about it. But one of the things I wanted to focus on is the intersection of what we were working on around data, how data worked in there, information, and then the intelligence, the impact. And I wanted to kind of go with the theme that we have from evidence to impact. One of the things in particular when we talk about the evidence to impact, it's never really about like the evidence itself, right? So when you think about that and you're doing, whether it's data science or you're working with data in general, but it's always what I learned through this case, it's a little bit more about like the process and then the discipline to execute that process and then the impact of it as well. And then the issues and the challenges that you have with data when opinions come into play with this. So again, I started doing this. I was working this case back in I think we started this particular case in 1994 when I came on scene and started working it. It had been going on a little bit before that. They didn't know much about it, but all we had a lot of data. Right, we knew something was happening. So this is the pipeline sort of that we were using. We had a lot of data. We were focused on just the raw facts of what was taking place. The information, the intelligence, the actions is the pipeline that we went through. But from the data side, one of the things we recognized was that we were losing agents. CIA was losing agents and operations were being compromised overseas. I want to start the beginning with the end. Ultimately, what happened in February of 2001, a gentleman by the name of Robert Hansen, who was a former FBI officer, or he was an FBI agent at the time, we arrested him right after, I didn't arrest him, FBI arrested him right after he had dropped a bag of secrets under a footbridge in Vienna, Virginia, which was about 20 minutes from where I lived, for the Russians to pick up, and they arrested him on the street. He had been committing espionage for about 22 years. He compromised a number of different assets that were working for CIA. They were ultimately executed, and he made a little bit of money, not as much money as you'd think that he would have made for 22 years of espionage. But again, what I wanted to focus on is that pipeline and the good and the bad of the ugly of the pipeline when you're dealing with data. So the evidence that we know it existed from day one. 22 years of espionage, $1.4 million is all he made. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but for 22 years, it's not very much at all in my mind. He gave up about 6,000 classified documents, and 3 lives were executed as a result of him telling the Russians that they had Russian American spies working for the U.S. He told the Russians that, and this is why they paid him in cash and diamonds and ultimately executed some very high-level resources. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the evidence was kind of already there, right? So when you're looking at data, a lot of times it's already right in front of you. It's already there, but you have to do some things to massage it, get it to the level to where it becomes information, and then onto that intelligence where you can do something actionable with it. So this is where it kind of starts. So we had all these dots, but we had no lines in between them, all right? So just prior to we started working this case, there was another famous case by a gentleman by the name of Aldrich Ames. And he was a spy for the Soviets as well for about 20 plus years. And he had just been arrested in '94, right? When I was coming on scene, he had just been arrested. So that, from the data perspective and an opinion perspective, played a role in some of the misfires that we had in this case and going forward. But again, we had a lot of data points. We had a lot of things to look at, but we just didn't know what it meant. So you got spry 26-year-old Jerry Davis comes on scene. I get onto this team, and they're like, here's the issue. We've had a number of assets that were killed, not quite 10 years prior, maybe 7 or 8 years. And we believe we have a mole in the system, but we didn't know where. We just had these data points. And so this is one of the things we knew was assets were disappearing. In the mid-'80s, most of these gentlemen were killed either in 1987 or 1988. They were found out, and they were ultimately executed. Dmitry Polyakov, he was significant to the U.S. During the Vietnam era. He had given a tremendous amount of information on the Chinese and Vietnamese on what they were doing in Vietnam that the Russians had collected, and he was providing that to the United States. Martinov and Moultrie, they were both given information to the United States on which officers at the U.S. embassies around the world, and particularly the United States, which one of those embassy officers were actually KGB officers. So then we would follow them around. These assets just disappeared. All their work, everything they had done for us, all of these missions were being compromised. And again, we didn't know. We just had data points. The thinking was that it had been Aldrich Ames. That was the thinking about it. And so the focus on this data started trying to look at kind of Aldrich Ames, and there was these kind of preconceived notions that were going on already. But things still didn't fit. We're looking at the data, we're looking at what's going on. Aldrich Ames had been arrested. We start correlating the data on, okay, well, where was Aldrich Ames? What did he have access to back then? Where was he working? Where was he when these individuals were wrapped up? Did he have access? And so we're looking at all these different data points. Anybody that had access or connections to the individuals that were ultimately executed, we started looking through those. And we had a couple of other cases that we couldn't figure out what was going on with them, but we knew that Aldrich Ames, who's in prison at this point, that he didn't have anything to do with them because he didn't have access to these files. One is the Felix Bloch investigation. Felix Bloch was an embassy, a State Department. He was the highest ranking State Department employee ever to be, he was never convicted of espionage, but he was fired from the State Department because we were pretty sure that he was giving secrets to the Russians. We actually photographed him, I believe it was in Paris, handing a briefcase to a Russian embassy official at a car. The thing is with espionage, to be able to try someone with espionage, you have to prove transmission. You have to prove that someone actually gave secrets, and secrets are actually received and taken. But we didn't know what was in the briefcase. We're pretty sure they were secrets. When Felix Bloch was later interviewed about this, he said they were trading stamps. He says, they're trading stamps. I'm not doing anything bad. So for the good of the government, the State Department said, we don't believe you, you're fired. They fired him. Ultimately, what we determined is someone had tipped off Felix Bloch that he was under investigation. And there was a recorded phone call that the US government had recorded between Felix Bloch and an individual. Again, this is in the 80s. And all the message said, when he picked up the phone, the voice on the other end said, "You have a cold." And that was the end of that. So Felix Bloch kind of went underground. The investigation started. We could never prove espionage, so he was ultimately fired. So we were still trying to figure out who tipped off Felix Bloch as well. The other side of this is the embassy had there was an eavesdropping tunnel that was underneath the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C., that the FBI and other members of the intelligence community had tunneled in under the ground in Washington, D.C., under the embassy, and we were collecting information from the Russian embassy. Well, that whole mission, that operation, got spilled over to the Russians as well. They became known about that, and we're like, well, how did they know about this operation? Well, that operation cost about $30 million or something like that to set up. So again, we have these anomalies and we have these data points, and we're trying to figure out how to fuse these together, and what does this all mean? How do we get to the information stage of all of this? So we started off and we put together, a task force was put together, and we called it Gray Suit, because again, it was a name, there was no face. We just had records and records of data, but didn't know exactly what was going on. So we started to formulate this organization, and then we started to connect the dots, right? Just like you all do and what you do, you put together, you look at data, and you have to start connecting the dots. And the connecting the dots, this is where it gets a little perilous, because there are individuals who have, again, preconceived notions or opinions about things, about the data, that can be wrong. It can be right, but it also can be very, very wrong. So we put together this joint mole hunting team, and it was CIA and FBI. CIA because we have kind of primacy when it comes to investigation for overseas. We're not allowed to work in the United States against US citizens unless they are an agent of a foreign power. And so the FBI, they're the ones that do the arrest and all that. So the FBI, they put together this joint team. I was a part of that team. This is an old picture from boarding an airplane somewhere out in the world. And a buddy of mine that's there who's still a spy, blocked out his face. He's still 30 some odd years later working for CIA and working cases all over the world. But we interviewed something to the FBI, largely interviewed something around 200 people or so. And you have to think about this when you're looking for that needle in the haystack, and something as sensitive as this is very compartmentalized, how we're looking at data. So it became a problem because the data is now, things are kind of in silos, and we're trying to build this information and this picture of how everything looks. But they did a pretty good job of keeping everything very compartmented. And so I'm working on a team. My particular team was very small. I had no idea until years later that there were hundreds of people working on this. I'm on a very small team, very critical piece, but there's hundreds of people collecting more and more data and starting to paint a picture. But we still had the problem. The problem was about opinions. And the FBI had a very particular opinion about what was taking place with the data based on the Aldrich Ames case. It was like a recency bias, right? So they had a recency bias, and that they were interjecting that bias into the investigation. And so I threw this in here because it's something that really kind of resonates me. And this is, from Jim Barksdale, the CEO of Nectope, and you probably all have probably seen this before at some point. It's like, if we have data, let's look at data. But if all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. And that's what was happening between FBI and CIA. They actually didn't have a very good relationship. CIA and FBI has never really had very good working relationships. FBI wants to arrest people and put them in jail. CIA, we like to look at things and see, let's see where this goes. Let's see who's at the top of this food chain. And we like to pull on the thread and pull on the thread. And so there was a big clash on what was really happening. The opinion was because Aldrich Ames was such a recency issue and we had all this data, the opinion was it's somebody at CIA. So they started focusing in on CIA very heavily. And in particular, they focused on a particular individual by the name of Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly was a career CIA officer. He had been in counterintelligence as well. And they started to focus in on him because he did have access to some of those cases that had happened before. So when you look at the data and we started putting the data together and information, his name popped up a few times. Now we're using, back in those days, I used a lot of hand tools. We did things like putting data together. We did association matrices and drew things out and made lines and connected people to places to things and cars and vehicles and money transfers and all that kind of stuff. And they kept looking at Brian Kelly. And so Brian Kelly at the time was the deputy chief of station for CIA in Panama. So he worked at the U.S. Embassy. His cover was he was a State Department employee, but he was the #2 guy for CIA in Panama. And so the focus started become on Brian Kelly. So CIA taps me on the shoulder. They go, "We want you to go down to Panama and look at this Brian Kelly guy." You know, everybody's got code names on it. So I get on a plane, few other people. We take them some gear down there, and we're watching Brian Kelly day in, day out. And Brian Kelly, we get some information on him. One of the things Brian Kelly liked to do, like he was an avid tennis player. He loved to play tennis. And we went to the hotel. It was kind of like a little resort that he loved to play tennis at, and he was a member. And I remember the first day in country, I'm down there, and I'm with a colleague, and we went to go look at this hotel where he plays tennis, just to kind of just look around, get the lay of the land. And we're standing, and I'm looking on a big board, and they got all their members and their pictures and everything up there, and I'm talking to the individual, and I turn around, and there's Brian Kelly like 5 feet away from me. And, you know, I didn't do the, oh, but I did. I turned to my buddy, and I said, "Hey," I go, that our guy out there?" And he goes, "Yeah, absolutely, that's our guy," you know, and you try to act normal, you try to like everything's good. Brian Kelly, he had no idea who we were, didn't catch his attention or anything, but we started focusing on him. I took 3 more trips over the next couple of years down to Panama to look at Brian Kelly, and I was coming back with more information and putting things together, and I was saying, this ain't the guy. He's boring. Back in those days, who's old enough to remember internet cafes? Yes. Brian Kelly loved internet cafes. And he was a single guy, but he loved to go to internet cafes, and he would do email exchanges with a lady that he was dating in the United States that would come into Panama. And he was a super nice guy, but he was kind of a nerd, you know, and he'd show up, he had flowers at the airport and that sort of thing. But he just didn't fit the profile. Everything we knew about him, watching him, it just didn't match. Even though the bureau side of the house, they were like, no, the data points here. And again, it was that opinion piece that kept coming in. They're like, he's close enough to this. He's got to be the guy. We just had a recent CIA officer that was arrested. It's got to be the guy. Even though the evidence and more data and information was saying that's not the guy. So ultimately what happened is Brian Kelly's life was ruined. His life from the CIA, took the FBI's recommendation, pulled him out of his job from having access to sensitive information. They bugged his house. They followed his family around, essentially harassed the guy and tried to get a confession out of him. It didn't work because he was innocent. At the same time, we continued to put together data and information on what we had because we were under the belief that it's not him, there's somebody else. And ultimately, it started to become a little bit clearer for us. One of the reasons that they was following around and looking closely at Brian Kelly was a data point that they had gotten. That data point was they did a trash cover. So they went through his trash one night, and they found in his trash, they found a map. And in the spy world, people draw hand maps on little pieces of paper to say, like, this is where I'm going to drop my secrets. This is where you can pin them up from. So he had this map that went through a park, and for some reason, spies love parks. I don't know why, but they just love parks. And it was through a park and all this, and they're like, hey, we found this piece of paper. He's doing drops in parks. And this park was probably about 15 minutes from his house. And they send us all to this park on a particular day, on a weekend. So I'm in this park. I'm like Joe, anybody in this park. I'm riding a bike around like I'm just a regular guy in the park. We've got all kinds of surveillance equipment set up. We've got tons of people everywhere. We've got officers and agents who walk around like they're walking their dog, and we're waiting for Brian Kelly to come through. What did happen was a known Russian KGB officer who had been picked up on the other side of Virginia getting on the metro with his bike, was on his way in that direction, had gotten off his bike at his last stop, and was riding towards the park. So they were like, we got him. This guy's coming to get secrets or something. And none of that happened. Ultimately, what we found out was Brian Kelly loved to run. That was just his running trails. He would draw out his running trails where he was going, and the whole Russian KGB guy, he was just out riding his bike out in Virginia. That was later down the road. But things started to become a little bit clearer around the data and what we're putting together and the information. And the big thing was the turning point of a $7 million offer that we gave to a former KGB officer for information. Now, we had tried this multiple times. We tried to bribe KGB officers into giving us information. And ultimately, at one point, I had gone down to a place in South America. We're picking up on a KGB officer who was about to retire. And the whole scheme was, we knock on he was on vacation. We knock on his door and offer him $20 million for information. Now, I'm posted in the lobby. We had some Portuguese-speaking officers. They went and did that, knocked on his door, and the guy pretty much almost got in a fist fight with them, right? And the reason why he didn't want to talk to because in the intelligence community, particularly in the Russians, as you're about to retire, they will test you. They will see if you are going to go work for the other side for a particular amount of money or whatever. So he thought it was a setup. He thought, okay, my bosses and them, they want to see if I'm going to be loyal or not. So they're sending people to me who are American-speaking accents to see if I'm actually going to take money and sell them out and ultimately get executed. So he shut us down. We tried again with another individual on a train. Russian former KGB officer was on a train. We got on a train, a briefcase full of money, offered him some money on a train, and kind of worked. Ultimately, $7 million was paid to a former KGB officer who had information. He had a file. Remember, the wall had come down, so he had a file on a bunch of KGB operations that involved Americans. And in that file, now we're getting to the point of where it becomes intelligence. He had, in this file that we paid $7 million for, he had a tape recording of someone's voice, an auto recording from 1986. And one of the agents that you see at the top here from the FBI recognized the voice, but he couldn't place exactly who it was. And also on the tape, this individual in the files, there was a speech by General Patton that was recorded in these notes from the KGB, and one of the agents remembered, hey, there's an FBI agent here, Robert Hansen. He's used that exact same quote before in the past. So now we're starting to connect dots and things of that nature. And then finally, when the KGB, the Russians, would get information from this American asset would wrap it in a trash bag. Robert Hansen had very good tradecraft. He stayed undetected for a very long time, and he was a counterintelligence officer as well. So you got one counterintelligence officer trying to go against another counterintelligence officer, but so he never had his fingerprints were never on any of the documents. But he did leave fingerprints on that trash bag. So the FBI was able to pull off partial fingerprints off that trash bag. And then we put it all together. We ran his fingerprints, instant hit, Robert Hansen. And then the voice, and then the patent remark, it all came together. And now everybody's kind of like, we think we have our guy. We think we know who this is. The information now looks good, and it's actionable. So what happened, there was a decision to, let's go and arrest him. This is actually a screen cap of the video from when he left that park in 2001. He put that sack of secrets underneath a footbridge, and he was walking back to his car. About 10 FBI agents jumped out, guns, ready to go, and arrested him while a surveillance team videotaped it from a van that was across the street. But the operation started to close in. There was a really good movie called Breach. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Ryan Felipe plays this gentleman here, Eric O'Neill. Eric O'Neill was on the FBI. He was an FBI. He was on a ghost team. So the ghost team are a group of they're surveillance professionals, and they do surveillance on people all over the world. They have all kinds of tools, all kinds of technologies, ways that they do surveillance. So they use Eric O'Neill to go in and serve as an assistant to Robert Hansen. He hadn't been arrested yet. We were pretty sure it was him. We had the data. We had transferred that to information. Now we're in the intelligence stage where let's solidify this, wrap it in a bow. And so Robert Hansen was moved into a little bit of a job where he didn't have as much access to sensitive information. And we gave him assistant, and that assistant is this gentleman here, Eric O'Neill, who was on the ghost team, and his whole job was just kind of be with Robert Hansen all the time and see if he could detect anything. And ultimately, what he did was he knew that Hansen walked around, had a Palm Pilot that he used all the time. And at one point, Hansen had left his Palm Pilot in his office, in his bag, and the FBI had called Robert Hansen down into, they had an indoor shooting range. And they said, hey, come to the shooting range. We want to have a contest. They wanted to get him out of his office. So he leaves the office. That gave Eric time to go into his Palm Pilot, hook up some special equipment into it, and download everything that was on that Palm Pilot. And so he does this. It's a really good scene in the movie if you get a chance to check it out. So anyway, so he does that. And we pull off information. We see all the information, his contacts with KGB officers and that sort of thing. So now we've gone from, again, that data piece. We've gotten past the opinion issue that created some problems, to information, and now we have true intelligence. So what we do, again, him coming out of the park, he gets arrested after 22 years of espionage activities against the United States. So we talk about, just kind of bring it home a little bit between all of you. Kind of look at this, the stage, the data, the information, the intelligence, and the action. You look at the things we did in that investigation and things about how you may operate at your schools and data that you pull. A student misses 3 days in a row. Maybe, it's just a data point. And then you find out their attendance plus grades and the discipline records pulled together. Now you got some information, and then the patterns matches last year's early warning signals, and a counselor calls somebody in on a Tuesday, as I put down here. This is kind of like the correlation I want you to kind of think through and how we worked this case, again, a number of years ago. And that's what we call, from evidence to impact. This is, Hansen taught us the hard way that, the evidence is usually never the problem. I opened up with this. It's the process and the discipline and the willingness to act on what the data is already telling you. So you have the evidence. The question is, how long is before it becomes impact? And there's things you have to do in there. And again, I always tell folks, be careful of biases and opinions and things of that nature. Always go with the facts. That is the end of my presentation. I left a couple things for you. There's a podcast. I was a technical advisor on a podcast for CBS News a couple of years ago. The podcast is narrated by Major Garrett. They got a hold of me over email. Have no idea how they knew I was attached to this, but they contacted me. They said, hey, we want to do a podcast. It's an 8-week-long podcast, about 45 minutes, about the Hansen case. Really interesting. It was really fun to do. And I gave them what information I could, and they just, I validated what I could for them, but it was a good podcast. And then the movie I talked about earlier is a movie called Breach that talks about this case, and it's Ryan Felipe is one of the main characters in there. That's my LinkedIn QR code. It's not going to take your banking information, as far as you know, if you click on it. But that is all I have for you. I thought I'd make something maybe a little bit interesting for you and see the world of how the world of espionage and spy catching works. I hope that you appreciated that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. I myself can see a ton of parallels between what Jerry was talking about, data turning into information, into intelligence that then decisions can be made upon. We have examples in this room of the kind of data we collect and how it's used. I can see a lot of parallels between Jerry's presentation and what you do, maybe all except for the wanting to kill somebody part. That probably doesn't happen, although some of you data stewards may think differently. Jerry brings to light a theme that matches what we're talking about here at the conference, from evidence to impact. The data that is collected from students and teachers, districts, parents, turned into information from which we can glean intelligence and make decisions upon about funding, about student counts, about attendance, chronic absenteeism, special education challenges, all of that, extremely important to what we do. And I'm just thrilled you were able to bring to light a real-world example of how that can affect the kinds of decisions that are made. The opinion bias, I was looking at Max while you were talking about that. Max never hears any opinions, I'm sure. He just gets raw data and he makes decisions. But imagine how opinions of the data, not facts derived from the data, but opinions can affect what we do. And I thought that was very excellent. Thank you, Jerry. We have a little bit of time until the afternoon session starts. Please network. Enjoy the company of others. Hopefully you've learned some things in the sessions that you've attended so far. We have a great lineup this afternoon. A couple of duplicates in case you were at a different session yesterday and couldn't make you the one you want today. We're repeating a couple of those. Check your schedule. And enjoy the rest of the day. Have a little bit of fun if you can, and a safe drive home. Those next sessions will start at 1:20, is that right? Okay, so you've got a little bit of time. I want to thank you, and please join me in thanking Jerry again for his presentation today.